It is time for the post-Week 10 edition of the College 12 Pack. As always, I'm your host, Patrick Kahn, Senior Editor of the College Wires. With me, Tyler Natuno of LSU Tigers Wire. But I want to, before we really dive into it, because we've got a lot to get to, we're going to talk about where we were right, where we were wrong, what the conference title pictures look like. But first, I just wanted to touch base on a tweet that was sent out Monday morning from Pete Thamel. It says, don't expect any action by the Big Ten in the Michigan sign stealing case for at least the next 48 hours, as the league sportsmanship rules allow for a reasonable chance to respond to an institution or individual. Sources have told ESPN that there'll be an illegal battle if there's punitive suspension by the Big Ten to Jim Harbaugh. And this is interesting. Obviously, people are wanting some sort of punishment to come down before Michigan, Ohio State, it seems like that final game, and ultimately hopefully keeping Michigan out of postseason play, potentially suspending Harbaugh again. He's already dealt with a self-imposed suspension, but just really interesting, Tyler. As we talked about off air before we came on, it kind of seems like while they're not arguing that they didn't steal signs, they want to point the finger at their biggest rivals.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like sort of where we're heading with this in terms of the way Michigan's trying to frame it, right? Is that like Connor Stalions was acting as sort of a rogue agent here, and Ohio State sort of orchestrated the whole leak of the situation, to take down the rival. Which, I mean, that's kind of neither here nor there when it comes to like actually what Michigan's being accused of here. So yeah, I mean, I think we'll kind of just see how things play out. I mean, you and I feel like we talked about before the season, before we knew any of this, the Connor Stalions sign stealing stuff. I think we were both kind of operating under the assumption that there was a decent chance that Michigan's wins and a potential title, if they won it this year, would likely be vacated because of some of the other NCAA things they've been dealing with. I mean, this just kind of adds, fuel to that fire. We'll see if anything happens mid-year. I mean, it would honestly surprise me a little bit if the Big Ten announced any sort of like postseason ban for Michigan or suspension for Harbaugh during the season. Would be a little bit surprising to me, but this is also an unprecedented situation. So I'm kind of, I'd be lying to you if I told you I have a clear picture for how this kind of thing will play out.
And of course, we have more distraction as Michigan actually begins their 2023 schedule. I say that jokingly because they're finally going to play somebody who could actually probably give them a little bit of a game. Penn State coming off the 51-15 demolishing of Maryland. They're going to host Michigan this week in Happy Valley. So, hey, distractions. But it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that plays out. But let's get into segment one here on the first six-pack of the week. We'll get you the second six-pack later in the week, as we always do. We're going to talk about where I was wrong. And Tyler, I'm going to start out with Florida State. I came on the show on Wednesday. That was the show that was released on Thursday, where I said that Florida State was going to roll all over Pittsburgh, and they got off to another one of those sluggish starts that we've seen before, like against the Boston College Eagles early this season. They weren't quite able to win by 4 touchdowns. They did win 24-7, but not quite to where I thought they would be. And it just raises more questions about how, while they've been consistently winning, they've been inconsistent with how they play football this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, look, Pitt's just sort of, I think, a really hard team to try to figure out at this stage. Like you look at them and you could kind of see, Pitt's kind of in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, they knock off a Louisville team that looks better every single week. I mean, Louisville coming off of a 34-3 beatdown against Virginia Tech, a hot Virginia Tech team. Like Louisville's been pretty great in every single game this year, except for a 17-point loss to Pittsburgh. But that same Pittsburgh team coming off a 51-point loss to Notre Dame, and then somehow, figures out a way to at least keep this game semi-competitive. I mean, you look at 24-7 in the final, it's not like, wow, Florida State was really in danger there. But in the first half, it kind of felt like it. I mean, this was a low-scoring game. I think it was like 10-7 at halftime. Like, they were sticking in this in the first half. And yeah, I mean, it's a little bit concerning. I think, an FSU offense that everyone talks about how explosive it is, and it is explosive with guys like, Jordan Travis, and then, receivers and Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. They're really talented. It's been a little hit or miss, though. They've played kind of a lot of not great ACC competition recently, aside from that Duke game. And, they've looked pretty good this past week, not so much. I mean, it'll be interesting to watch moving forward as they've got, really at this point, it kind of looks like the only thing that could stand between them and a 12-0 regular season is that game on the road against Florida Thanksgiving weekend, which, as we'll get into a little bit later, not exactly the most threatening team right now. So, I mean, the path looks good for Florida State, but yeah, a little concerning the way they played in this game.
Yeah, really, it was off to another slow start. If you look at it, they had a fumble on their first drive, turnover on downs in their second drive, 4 straight punts before they were able to turn it on. It's almost like that Pittsburgh touchdown, kind of like, okay, we're done playing around. They rattle off 24 straight points on 4 out of their next 5 drives, and then really the offense kind of just halted because at that point the game was essentially over. But still, you'd like to see more of a offensive onslaught, and we'll see because they'll have more opportunities. It almost feels like Florida State's just kind of cruising into that ACC championship game at this point, and we'll talk about the title pictures a little bit later. Now, Tyler, you were also wrong this week, and I'll go ahead and let you lay out the foundation for that one.
Yeah, I've got a pretty big mea culpa to offer to the Alabama Crimson Tide, not just for what happened this weekend, but for things I've been writing and saying about them on here and in my other outlets all season long. Look, after that Texas loss, I really thought this was going to be not necessarily the end of the dynasty, but I thought this was a sign that things were falling off. I thought this particularly was going to be a down year. I thought they'd drop a couple more games. Now they're 8-1, and they probably are going to win out and win the SEC West and be playing Georgia for a chance at the college football playoff. So obviously they not go on the road. They win at home, get their revenge against LSU 42-28. That game was, I picked a close game. I picked LSU to win 38-34, but I thought that there was a reality where LSU actually pulls away and wins that game kind of comfortably. Their offense looked game in the first half. They were tied at 21 in the locker room, came out of the gate in the second half and scored a touchdown on their opening drive to take a lead, but that was all they got in the second half. So Alabama's defense really tightened up. I think we talked about going into the game that Florida State was kind of the blueprint Alabama would try to follow in this game. And honestly, it was a little eerie how well it did follow that blueprint. It was a back and forth shootout for a while. Alabama ultimately takes a 7-point lead. Jaden Daniels throws a costly interception while they're driving to try to tie, just like he did in the Florida State game. And that ultimately swings it when you're looking at an LSU defense that is rough right now. I mean, I didn't think that Jalen Milroe would be able to do what he did on the ground in that game, but he was incredible. I mean, he had 155 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. They could not tackle him. They could not get Alabama off the field. The secondary we talked about, they're banged up. They were starting a guy in Javian Toviano, a true freshman at corner. He hadn't played in a game before on defense. So first game action at corner is a start against Alabama. That was pretty tough. The linebacker play wasn't there. I mean, it just was not a good game for LSU's defense. And, frustrating for that team, given they've got 3 losses and, any hopes of what they wanted to accomplish this year are basically out the window. But Alabama all of a sudden looks dangerous. And, I don't think either of us are that fired up about this Georgia team. I think all of a sudden Alabama looks like a real threat to potentially win this conference and take a playoff spot.
Yeah, they do. And you have to obviously last week I said that I was leaning towards Alabama. Now, I still thought the game was going to be close, not like this, but really ultimately with that third quarter, that first possession for the next 3 drives that Alabama had the football, that was pretty much it. Jalen Milroe really was able to take over on the ground. He did throw the ball effectively, but really this was about the running game and what they were able to do. And I think you're right. When you look at their potential matchup with Georgia, Georgia isn't the Georgia that we've seen the last 2 years where they're kind of just throttling, lesser opponents or even some tough opponents. I mean, we saw that going into their second title game with what they, a TCU team that had lost 1 game all year had just taken care of business against Michigan, and they didn't have any hope. They didn't have a prayer in that game. But I can think we look at this Georgia team and we don't think that, but, really hats off to the job that Nick Saban's doing. And again, it goes to It's not how you start; it's how you finish. That defense has played a lot better. Jalen Milroe has really played a lot better since he was benched early on in favor of Tyler Buckner, who I think if Buckner was starting this game, LSU probably wins in a blowout because I just really didn't see that offensive threat when he was running it. But Milroe, he's essentially running the ball like another running back, and they were able to take care of business. But we talked about where we were wrong. Let's talk about where we were right. Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma in Stillwater. That's their second straight win. The last time they beat Oklahoma, that was the final game that Lincoln Riley would coach as the head coach at Oklahoma before he left for USC. This time around, it's the final matchup for the foreseeable future in Bedlam. But I know a lot of people are bringing up the non-called pass interference, and it clearly looked like they should have called it. Referee came out and said that Stoops' foot was out of bounds, and that's why he didn't throw the flag, which I think he probably would have stayed in bounds had the defender not contacted him. However, that's neither here nor there. That game has been decided. Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, and now they're smelling roses right now. They're looking pretty, as it looks like they might be facing Texas in the Big 12 title game on December 2nd in Arlington, Texas.
Yeah, you were right on this one. I was not. I thought Oklahoma would bounce back in this game. I mean, look, a lot of concerns here, I think. First of all, like you kind of said, Ollie Gordon absolutely went off in this game. Got it right here. He had scored 2 touchdowns, I think. Yeah, he scored 2 touchdowns, went over 100 yards. Like, he had a really great game. And, I think defensively, it was a concern for Oklahoma. Like, a defense that had been pretty solid. We talked about last week, not really the reason they lost to Kansas. They gave up 38, but had chances. Today, Saturday, they gave up almost 500 yards to that Oklahoma State team that had kind of been, outside of Ollie Gordon, had been a little bit struggling offensively. They put up a lot of yards, but again, like we've seen, this offense just is not capitalizing. They move the ball, but they, go 0 for 2 on 4th downs. They turn the ball over 3 times, and you only score 24 points, and that's costing you. I don't know what to say. This team has in a lot of ways taken a significant leap this year, but it's still limited in ways that are kind of hard to swallow. I think there's just no reason this team should be struggling in the ways that it is. Beating Texas was great, but now you've lost to 2 teams you're more talented than, and it's basically, like you said, cost you probably a chance at playing for a Big 12 title when it looked like you were going to have the inside track to the playoffs. So yeah, it's tough.
If you look late in that game, the drives tell itself: downs, punt, fumble. 3 drives right there. You have an opportunity to kind of take over that game late in the third, early in the fourth. You have 3 drives in the fourth quarter. One of them was a fumble, one of them was a field goal, and the other one's turnover on downs. And essentially, you give the game to Oklahoma State. Yeah, and again, much like people were calling for Brian Ferentz to be fired, people are absolutely upset with Jeff Levy right now. Once again, second game in a row, and now you look at teams like Kansas State and Oklahoma who are on the outside looking in. So that's tough. But we'll get more into them. Now, I know we talked just a minute ago about Georgia, but Georgia winning is where you were right, Tyler. And I think I don't think you squinted long enough, because I know you said last week if you squint long enough, you could see a reality where Georgia loses this game.
And you know what? I think that in a way that reality sort of was playing out for a little bit. Missouri battled in this game. It could have been, I think there was a reality where this game is significantly worse, but they just didn't really have quite enough. There were positive signs here. Like, Cody Schrader went over 100 yards. They ran the ball pretty well on Georgia, which is not an easy thing to do. Florida's got pretty good backs, and they couldn't do it last week. So, credit to Missouri for that. It just, really, to me, the disappointing thing was that they just didn't quite get enough out of the passing game. We know this is a really talented Georgia defense, But I kind of thought Missouri might be able to do a little bit more. Brady Cook had a pair of interceptions. He wasn't particularly efficient. I think only completed like 50% of his passes. Not huge games from Theo Weiss and Luther Burden, guys that I talked about last week is, potentially really challenging this Georgia team, guys of a caliber that they haven't really had to play so far. They got their own, but they didn't go off and take over that game, which I kind of think is what would have needed to happen for Missouri to pull that one off. And looking at Missouri's defense, which I thought going into the game was good enough to slow Georgia down, really wasn't on Saturday. I mean, Carson Beck had another very solid, efficient game, took care of business, and they ran the ball really well with Dejon Edwards and Kendall Milton. They both had solid games. So just ultimately, Missouri played pretty well in this game, but just did not really have the success on either aspect of the game to pull this upset off. But on the road, played them tough. I thought they acquitted themselves decently well, but not really surprised that's ultimately the way it played out.
I mean, close game going into the fourth quarter, and Georgia makes enough plays like they do to win games. But yeah, I agree with you. If you were to tell me the strong point of this Missouri offense in this game, I would have thought was Braden Cook, Theo Weiss, Luther Burden. But no, it was the run game. And I think the inability there to really get that pass game going, especially in the fourth quarter, is what ultimately cost them. I mean, the interceptions obviously were the big turnaround for Georgia to take care of this. They hit 2 field goals in the fourth quarter, and then there you have it. That's how they win this football game. And I think it just speaks to Georgia, just how well this team is coached. This is a team that they haven't lost in 2.5 years, dating back to the SEC title game in 2021. Good teams find a way to win. Great teams find a way to win. And that's what we're seeing with Georgia. They may not be as talented as they've been in the years past, but they're still winning football games. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. And right now, they control their destiny as far as playing for another national championship this year. They keep winning. Nobody's going to keep them out. Nobody's beat them in 2.5 years. And they just keep on rolling. As far as a team that's not doing too well right now, we saw the outcome of the USC-Washington game. And let me just tell you, spoiler alert, Alex Grinch was fired. The second coordinator in as many weeks as we found out their future. Last week, Brian Ferentz, it was announced that he would not be coaching beyond this year. Now Alex Grinch is out on the he's going to be looking for a job now that he got fired after that 52-42 absolute offensive onslaught, defense optional showdown with number 5 Washington.
Yeah, Patrick, I saw someone say on Twitter that Michigan's punishment from the NCAA should be having to hire Alex Grinch and Brian Ferentz as their coordinators. Thought that was pretty funny. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, this game was it kind of played out exactly like I would have thought. Neither team defensively is really quite there, but USC really not there. Like you said, Grinch fired. Probably should have happened last season. I mean, this was a long time coming. I think a lot of USC fans didn't want him to return this year, and they probably were right about that. You're 7-3, and you've kind of wasted a window here. We've been talking about that on the show. Caleb Williams is a really special player. I think he has his limitations. I think teams have kind of shown, especially in that Notre Dame game, that he has his weaknesses as a player that we maybe hadn't seen as much of prior to this season, but he's still really special. And I think it's honestly a shame that Lincoln, while he has turned things around at USC and raised the floor, it is still frustrating, I think, that they haven't been able to get over that hump. And it's largely because the defense is such a limiting factor. I mean, and you look at this game, Michael Penix had a good game, but this wasn't really the Michael Penix game. This was the Dylan Johnson game. He was a revelation in this game. Washington is not a team that has run the ball very well this season. All in all, they obviously rely a lot on Michael Penix and a lot on, deep balls, explosive plays in the passing game. Not in this game. I think it's a pretty big indictment of USC and Alex Grinch that you could call USC's defense a get-right game. But that's what it was. They figured out a way to run the ball in this game, and Dylan Johnson went off for 256 yards and 4 touchdowns. So absolutely incredible game. If they can keep that up, that's something to keep an eye on. I think that might be more of a USC specific issue that they were able to take advantage of. But if it wasn't already clear the writing was on the wall for Alex Grinch, I think letting a team that hadn't really been able to run the ball very much go for over 250 on you, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, and I believe last week you called it. You said first team to punt in this game was going to lose. Well, that first team was the USC Trojans as they punted it away to Washington. Washington returned serve though; they punted it right back to them, and that was really the only punt for Washington in that game. But yeah, you can go back to it, and you talked about the defense. I mean, really just going back to the Colorado game, I think is where it really started. You gave up 41 to that team. You won the game, but you gave up 41. You gave up 41 to Arizona in triple overtime. You gave up 48 to Notre Dame. That was a loss. You gave up 34 to Utah. That was a loss. You gave up 49 to California, barely won. And you gave up 52. So there's nothing that you look at the outcomes of these games, and there was nothing that's really going to help them as far as what the defense could provide. And that's why Grinch had to go. That's the same reason why Ohio State didn't keep Grinch around. That's the same reason why Oklahoma didn't want to keep him around, although he left on his own volition. But, they weren't going to want to keep him, especially with how that defense performed under his watch. And let's be honest, it's not going to get any better this week, Tyler. They got to go to Eugene, play in Autzen Stadium against an Oregon team that might be the best team in the Pac-12 right now, regardless that Washington is undefeated. That Oregon Ducks team, they look like the real deal.
Yeah, Oregon, if you didn't pay any attention, which it was on the Pac-12 network, so most of you probably did not, but they were kind of playing with their food a little bit against Cal, and it was like a 14-10 game, and it was like, what's going on there? And then you would check in every 5 minutes, and it was just like, oh God, oh no. And I think it ended up at like 63-19 or something like that. So Oregon looks really good. I mean, we talked about it last week, not to take anything away from Washington winning that game on the field, but I think if you polled both of us, if they played on a neutral site today, I think we're both taking the Ducks. And I am a little afraid of what that Oregon team is going to do to USC. An Oregon team that is as complete, I think, as anyone in the country, on both sides of the ball. Tough matchup. You saw what they did to a Utah team that really has USC figured out. They absolutely demolished them. This is going to be a scary game, I think, potentially.
Yeah, Bo Nix might have 500 combined yards in this game. Talking about running the football, potentially throwing the football. I mean, he almost had 400 against Cal. And USC's defense is just as bad. So definitely that. Let's talk about our surprise of the week. For me, Tyler, I think it was Rutgers. There for a while, because when I made my pick, I said, Ohio State's going to cover the spread in this one. And it wasn't until a late backdoor cover that I was right. I was a little bit surprised, though, given how good the Ohio State defense has been this year, that Rutgers, who really doesn't have a great offense, was able to hang around. But they are a much improved Scarlet Knights team, just not enough to deal with the waves that can come at you when you're facing an Ohio State team.
Yeah, I mean, let's just be honest. Like, Rutgers was never going to win this game, but like, this is a plucky team. I think Greg Schiano's done a really underrated job with Rutgers. I think they played them pretty tough, and they're bowl eligible. And, the end of the season is absolutely brutal for this team. They kind of had a 2-game stretch that was the season. They needed to win them both to get to bowl eligibility against Michigan State and Indiana. They got those wins. So they're kind of playing with house money at this point, in a really brutal schedule down the stretch, just kind of trying to see if they can knock someone off. And I think they have a chance this weekend. I think this is the one, if you're going to see this team get to 7 wins and sort of, which 7 wins in the Big Ten East, I think it should go without saying that's a unquestioned success in Piscataway. So if they could get this win this weekend against Iowa, it'd be huge. Regardless, though, I mean, again, really impressive job. This team punches above its weight class, and it's not going to be in the Big Ten East after this year. So things are going to get at least a little bit nicer. So I think you got to be kind of happy with your outlook if you're Rutgers. I mean, things look brighter now than they have since you made the jump to the Big Ten, which has been pretty much nothing, has brought you pretty much nothing but pain in that time.
Yeah, and they got close. It was a 5-point game late, and then, Marvin Harrison does what Marvin Harrison does, hauls in 2 touchdowns, game over. and Ohio State wins 35-16, covers that 18.5 point spread barely. But again, like you said, they're punching above their weight class. Talk about Rutgers. Hats off to them and the job that they're doing. Unfortunately, Tyler, we saw a New Year's Six bowl bid come to an end out west in the state of Colorado, and just an absolutely abysmal performance by one of our service academies.
Yeah, heartbreaking loss from Air Force. Undefeated no more. They were 8-0 coming into this game. Fall 23-3 at home to a pretty bad Army team. An Army team I watched pretty closely a couple weeks ago when they got shut out by LSU 62-0. Had a lot more success in this game. Zach Larrier, the Air Force quarterback, who's been really good this year. I mean, they have a very efficient offense. Was not efficient in this game. He went 9 of 22 passing, had a pair of interceptions. Air Force overall in this game had 6 turnovers. Army had 0. Probably lose that game 11 times out of 10. So can't really, that kind of tells the whole story there. Army wins this game with 253 yards of total offense. Bryson Daly, the quarterback, goes off on the ground. He totals 170 yards and 2 touchdowns rushing. So kind of just a breakdown across the board for an Air Force team that have been really solid all season, and still has a chance to win the Mountain West, undefeated in league play there. Probably, though, ends any hope of a New Year's Six bid for this team. And then in turn opens the door for, Tulane to return, maybe Liberty. They're still undefeated. So something to watch there, but disappointing. And now Army will go into that Navy game controlling its own destiny in the Commander-in-Chief's Cup. So they could take that with a win.
Yeah, speaking of Tulane, you're right. I think they've kind of taken over that New Year's Six bowl bid. But they're in a 3-horse race out in the American Athletic Conference to see who's going to come away as a winner. And hopefully, if Tulane plays its cards right, perhaps they're back in the New Year's Six bowl bid, as we saw last year against USC, which was, I guess, the beginning of the end for Alex Grinch out there. Tulane, SMU, and UTSA all at 5-0 at the top of that AAC. So that's an interesting 3-horse race right there, Tyler.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the AAC is really interesting. And talking about Tulane, by the way, I want to talk about a team that's been playing with fire. Beat Rice 30-28 last week. Beat a really bad East Carolina team. They were now 1-8. Beat them 13-10 on Saturday. So Tulane, not quite the same as last year. They got Michael Pratt back. I think we maybe understated how big of a loss Tyjae Spears would be on this team. I think he's really losing him has made a big difference. But they're still 8-1. Only losses to Ole Miss, so certainly not that bad there. Went out, they're probably in, but there are some tricky teams. Memphis is a good team in this conference, UTSA. So we'll see how things play out.
All right, let's run through the Power 5 conference title pictures. We'll start in the ACC just quick. Florida State, Florida State, Louisville. That seems like almost a foregone conclusion. You talked about potentially Louisville could probably lose another game. They have a 1-game lead over Georgia Tech for that number 2 spot in the ACC title game.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Georgia Tech, we'll see. Look, first of all, we're going to know if Georgia Tech's a real candidate. We'll know after this week because they play Clemson in Clemson. So, they've been plucky. They're going to have to go beat a team that has a lot of momentum on its side right now and in Death Valley where they have historically played very well. So that's going to be tricky, I think.
Moving on to the Big 12, we have Texas, Oklahoma, who won the de facto semifinal games last week. They kind of hold their destiny in their own hands. Kansas, Oklahoma, Kansas State, West Virginia, Iowa State, all tied, 5-way tie for that number 3 spot. So, but essentially, Oklahoma would need both Kansas and Oklahoma State to falter for them to jump back in the picture. So I think we might see an all-orange Big 12 title game in Arlington.
Yeah, like we talked about, realistically ended Oklahoma's shot at reaching the Big 12 title, though, we could always see some chaos happen. But Texas, passed their big test without Quinn Ewers. We still don't really know what his timetable of return looks like, but without Malik Murphy, they pull it off in overtime against Kansas State. So they're still sort of in the driver's seat there. And yeah, I think barring some sort of pretty surprising upset, it looks like we're heading towards a Texas-Oklahoma State Big 12 championship, which I don't think anyone after that Oklahoma win over Texas, I don't think anyone would have guessed that that's what we would be getting.
Yep, that is for certain. It felt like Oklahoma was the team that absolutely was going to be there, and now it's Texas that's absolutely going to be there. It looks like out in the Big Ten, it's really a 3-dog race at the top of the Big Ten East: Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. Winner gets to beat down Iowa. It seems like Iowa's not locked into that spot, but that just seems like to be the way that it's trending. Michigan and Penn State will play this week, so one of those teams. Well, if Penn State loses, they're ultimately out, and it'll boil down to Michigan, Ohio State once again. Or if Penn State wins this game, there could be a lot of chaos come week 13.
Yeah, the Big Ten is definitely the X factor with all these discussions. We could end up getting a pretty chalky playoff, but things could get weird. Like you said, Penn State could functionally be out of this race if they lose to Michigan this weekend. If they pull off that win, though, and then Ohio State can get back in the win column against Michigan, yeah, you're looking at a 3-way tie of 11-1 teams, and could get very, very interesting. As far as which one gets the nod to go play in Indianapolis, and then obviously if any of them can sneak in as an 11-1 non-conference champ into the playoffs. So Big Ten, definitely a lot of potential for chaos, but all of that really hinges on Penn State finding a way to win this weekend.
Absolutely. All right, we have in Conference USA, Liberty Flames, 7-0, 9-0 overall. They look like a shoe-in to play for the Conference USA championship or to be the champs. Unfortunately, Jacksonville State, who's 5-1 and 7-3 overall, doesn't qualify for the postseason because of a stupid NCAA rule. Looks like New Mexico State, who's really been fantastic since Jerry Kill took over that program.
Yeah, want to talk about both of them for a second. So first of all, yeah, Jacksonville State, one of a couple teams that's competitive in their conference, but unfortunately not eligible to win it. Also, James Madison would probably be the favorite to win the Sun Belt right now. But like Jacksonville State, they're not postseason eligible. New Mexico State, unbelievable, by the way. Understandably a team we don't really talk about a ton on this show, but man, Jerry Kill has done an incredible job. They're bowl eligible. They're probably going bowling back-to-back for the first time since 1959, 1960. Unbelievable work at a program that has just not had really any football success to speak of in decades.
I just want to know if Jerry Kill's getting another tattoo if they go bowling and win their game. That's what I want to know. All right, let's check on to the MAC. Who doesn't love some action? Miami of Ohio, 7-2, 4-1 in the East. Likely going to play Toledo, who is 5-0 and 8-1. Toledo versus Miami. That could be a really fun matchup. Both high-scoring teams. They put up a good amount of points. And of course, like I said, who doesn't love action?
Oh, yeah, it's great. We're getting into November. These games are all going to matter on the weeknights. Yeah, Toledo, I mean, they always recruit at the highest level in this conference. They won it last year. They are obviously the most talented team. And then Miami, Ohio is kind of a surprise this season, has sort of, I think, Chuck Martin, the coach there, maybe he was a little bit warm in his seat coming into the year, but they've had a very, very nice season. And obviously winning that Eastern Division would go a long way.
Absolutely. All right, let's check out the Mountain West. We got Air Force, who's coming off that loss, but it was non-conference. They're 5-0 in conference play. Likely we'll have to face off with Fresno State, UNLV. Just hats off to the job that the Rebels head coach that is he's doing. That's a program that kind of people had written off in recent years, and really now Odom looks like he's got them rolling.
Yeah, I mean, this seemed like a little bit of a weird hire, kind of on both ends. It was like, I'm not sure what UNLV sees here. I'm not sure what Barry Odom sees here. Obviously, they both saw something, though. This is working really well. No one thought they would come out of the gates playing the way they have this year. So they're squarely in the mix. The Mountain West is actually a really interesting conference. A lot of good teams between, like you said, them, Fresno, Wyoming and Boise have played some really good games this season. It's a fun league. It's kind of a bummer that they've sort of self-immolated, and neither of them or none of those teams really have a legit shot at the New Year's Six, barring some wackiness down the stretch.
Yep. And then we have out in the Pac-12, before we get into the SEC, the Pac-12, clearly it's Washington, Oregon. We've talked about this at length. Without some wacky stuff going on with Oregon and or Washington, that looks like the matchup we're going to see. Arizona might be quietly one of the better teams in the Pac-12, sitting there at 4-2, just behind USC.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like we're heading towards a an Oregon-Washington rematch in the championship here. I think, USC, if they could pull the upset this weekend, obviously gets back in that mix. I think that's a big ask, but we'll see. Arizona, yeah, I mean, they're at least functionally in the mix. I think we'll see if they can kind of keep up the really impressive stretch of play they've been on down the stretch. But yeah, I mean, the race could certainly get interesting. There are some teams that could crash that party, but I think, Washington has a pretty good odds to win out, and I think Oregon does too. And obviously, if they both do, then that'll be a rematch.
Out in the SEC, Georgia out of the East. I think that's a pretty foregone conclusion at this point. They're 6-0 in conference play, 9-0 overall. Alabama 6-0 in conference play, 8-1 overall. Ole Miss is still in the picture, so to speak, but they're going to have to beat Georgia and hope that Alabama drops 2 games for them to have a shot at getting in there. So I would probably guess that this is Georgia-Alabama all over again, 2021.
Yeah, Georgia is, I mean, they just beat the team that was their biggest competition in the East. So they haven't clinched, but it's all but a guarantee at this point. And then Alabama is sort of in the same boat. They could clinch with a win over Kentucky this weekend. Ole Miss still has to play Georgia. So an Ole Miss loss would also clinch it for Alabama. So I think, yeah, you're probably between either Georgia beating Ole Miss or Alabama beating Kentucky. I think you're in all likelihood going to see the championship game spots get locked up this weekend.
And then we're going to wrap this up, this segment. We have the Sun Belt Fun Belt. James Madison, who again, much like Jacksonville State, is screwed out of any postseason play due to the fact that NCAA ruling on schools moving up from the FCS to the FBS. So it looks like we'll have a Coastal Carolina Chanticleers facing off with Troy Trojans in the Sun Belt Championship, barring anything crazy in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, Troy's the defending champion in this league. Kind of had a slow start to this season, but they're playing pretty well right now. Look like the best team in the league that's eligible to win it because obviously, like you said, James Madison is not. Coastal has had a very nice year. I think they could have easily had a drop off. They lose their coach, Jamie Chadwell, goes to Liberty, obviously doing a very nice job there. But new coach Tim Beck comes in, the OC from NC State. Again, a bit of a slow start, but they've turned it around. They've won some nice games down the stretch, and they've done it without Grayson McCall. By the way, Grayson McCall had a kind of a bad start to the year and then got hurt, so he's not playing right now, and they're still winning games. So Tim Beck has sort of found a way to get things right in year one, and if they could win that East Division, that'd be pretty cool.
And we're going to wrap up this episode of the College 12 Pack by doing our final segment. Tyler, it's time for therapy. Some people need some therapy out there, and I'm going to kick things off here. Washington State. Unfortunately, the Washington State Cougars have lost a lot of games in a row, a lot. And it's unfortunate because when you look at Washington State and what they were looking like coming into the season, a lot of people thought this could be a team that made some noise this year. But unfortunately, their run this season hasn't gone well since they beat Oregon State 38-35 on September 23rd. I'm talking losses to UCLA, blown out against Arizona, got beat by Oregon, got beat by Arizona State, lost to Stanford, and frankly, they could lose this week to California and Colorado next week. That's kind of the role that they've been on of late. Really unfortunate, but hopefully it'll be a little bit better in basketball season for the Washington State fans because I don't think this season is going to end well for them. And unfortunately, I think they might be looking for a new head coach in the very near future. Whatever role momentum that Jake Dykert had coming out of that 2020 season seems like it's all gone now.
Yeah, we've really run like the gamut of emotions here with this team this season. early on, when they beat Oregon State, we were like, wow, is this going to be a dark horse in the Pac-12? And then they lost a couple games. It's like, okay, no, they're more towards the middle of the pack. Now they've lost, back-to-back games to two of the worst teams in the league in Arizona State and Stanford. Now, all of a sudden, I mean, a bowl for a team that we thought could be a competitor in the Pac-12, a bowl looks tough to not likely. I mean, they end the year, got to likely win the next two games because they finished the season against Washington. I don't think they're going to win that game. They got to win these next two against Cal and Colorado. They're 4-5. I mean, both those teams have their problems, but have also, played some good teams tough. I don't think either of those are a given. And unless you're going to knock off Washington, you got to win one of them. So, yeah, I think you could miss a bowl here and things could get really, really rough for Jake Dykert, like you were saying.
1-5. That's their Pac-12 record right now. Lost 5 in a row. Not looking good. The teams that they're tied with, Arizona State, that's already beat them. California, they play this week. Colorado in the next couple weeks. I would arguably say that the losses to Stanford and Arizona State, not only the two worst teams in the league, they might be the two worst teams in all of college football. That's how bad that they have been this year and in recent years. That's tough. But, Tyler, I'm going to give you the floor because I know you need some much-needed therapy this week.
Yeah, this one's personal for me. Arkansas 39, Florida 36 in overtime. Look, speechless, honestly, speechless. Florida's 5-4, which is a little misleading because, as I'll get to in a second, the rest of the schedule is brutal here. So I don't know what to do with Billy Napier, to be honest with you. So he's 11-11 overall at Florida. He's 7-11 against Power 5 teams, which is not where you want to be. I mean, he is recruiting well. There's no doubt about it. Next year's team is going to be a lot more talented. He's got currently a class that ranks 3rd in the country. Got a 5-star quarterback committed. Got like 7 top 100 guys. Like he has a really nice 2024 class. Also, you keep losing games that just in inexplicable ways. I mean, this one, I mean, if you didn't watch this game, so Florida's driving. The game is tied at 33 in the final minute. Florida's driving down the field. They are getting into field goal range, but they don't have any timeouts left, right? So they get the first down, clock temporarily stops. They're in field goal range for what would be a 39-yard field goal. They rush to the line to spike the ball, but instead of just, spiking the ball like you do in that situation, they, for some reason, feel that they need to sub out like half their offense. They do that. Napier said after the game it was a mistake, like it was a miscommunication, but they do that. And in the process of doing that, they get an illegal substitution penalty. So that luckily was a dead ball penalty. So it wasn't a 10-second runoff that ended the game, but it did move the field goal back 5 yards. And Trey Smack, the kicker who had been really solid, misses from 44. Can't say for sure he would have hit that game winner from 39, but I mean, certainly more likely. Game goes to overtime. Florida kicks a field goal. Arkansas goes down, scores, wins. Billy Napier, I've talked about on the show. He doesn't have a special teams coordinator, right? He has a quality control analyst that handles that, but he's not, analysts are not on-field coaches. So that limits your ability in game to do those kind of things. Also doesn't have an offensive coordinator, and that's continuing to cause problems. Billy Napier's play calling, while this team did produce a little bit offensively in this game, it still isn't where it needs to be. Florida has a really bad offensive line, and they're not scheming to take advantage of it. It's just really causing a lot of problems now that they're playing better teams. And they are playing a lot better teams. And like I said, they're 5-4. You look at their remaining schedule, they've got to go at LSU this weekend, at Missouri after that, and then they close the season at home against Florida State. So you've got to win one of those games to get to bowl eligibility. You'll probably be at least a touchdown underdog in all of them. It's not looking great. And, Billy Napier went 6-7 last year. He's looking at 5-7 this year. He's not on the hot seat. He's not going to get fired this season, barring they lose out and, the recruiting class falls apart and then he has really no leg to stand on at that point. But man, he enters 2024 with so much to prove. And it's tough because I'm not going to read the schedule off, but Florida's schedule next year is insane. So he's going to come into next year with really high expectations, a ton of pressure, and a very tough gauntlet to do it. Things are not great for Florida right now. Obviously, time to turn it around. And if you win one of these last 3 games, people won't really remember as much what happened against Arkansas. But if you don't and you miss a bowl game in year 2, it's tough.
Yep. And I am looking at that 2024 schedule as we speak. And You're not lying.
I was not lying. It's awful.
That's a rough one. Only one game against a non-Power 5 team, Stanford in week 2. That's going to be a tough one. But yeah, I think you look at Florida right now, and especially losing to an Arkansas team who was pretty much one of the worst in the SEC.
Had lost 6 in a row.
6 in a row. Hadn't won a SEC game this year going in. It really looked like one of the worst Arkansas teams I've seen since Chad Morris.
Also had an interim offensive coordinator in his first game and put up almost 500 yards.
That's saying something. But hopefully for Florida's sake, they can get another win, get to the postseason. But it is going to be tough, and we'll kind of see how LSU looks this week heading in. We do know Jaden Daniels had to leave the game with an injury, but we'll see how he shakes out throughout the week. But as we know, I think he has a capable backup in Garrett Nussmeier. I think he's capable of doing some things. But that'll do it for this edition of the College 12-Pack. We're going to be back on Wednesday as we get you ready for Week 11. Got some big games coming up as we enter the final leg of the season. And we get you ready for conference championships in a couple weeks. And we will recap the college football playoff week 2 rankings that will be revealed on Tuesday night. But for Tyler, I'm Patrick. See you on Wednesday.